So it looks like we've saved the best for last here, talking about some really exciting, very juicy things about seed policy. So my colleague, Christopher Kelly Bisson, he worked with me on this presentation. He's supposed to be presenting with me, but he had to go, so I'm going to fly solo. And I also recognize that we're running a bit late, so I'm just going to keep this presentation to about 10-15 minutes, so not too long. Okay, there we go. So just to give you a little bit of context for why it's me and Christopher who are talking about seed policy here, it's because we both work with an organization called the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. Some of you might be familiar with this initiative because it's the initiative that's been partnering with the University of Manitoba for the last few years with a participatory plant breeding program. But this initiative it's been going since 2012, and the goal of the initiative is to build resilient seed system in Canada. So there's a bit of information. And so mostly the way that we do that is we partner together with various stakeholders, including farmers, government, and researchers, and work on various programs that support the work of preserving biodiversity and also creating new biodiversity. And we recognize that policy is an important part of that. Like we need policy in place that can support that kind of work. And so that's why Christopher was hired just this past fall. His background is in political economics. So he's been hired as a policy analyst to help us out with some of this policy stuff that's been going on. So the goal of this presentation was to just give you a bit of an update of what is going on with seed policy. I don't know, some of you are probably aware of some of the changes that have been proposed and some of the changes that are going on. So just to give you a bit of an update, and then also to talk a little bit about how it might impact the organic sector, and then to talk about some possible other options and alternatives. And I know that sometimes this conversation can be a little bit difficult, it's a little bit complex, there's a lot of different players who are involved in it. And also it's really shifting, it's changing, and it's changing quickly. I gave this presentation at the Organic Alberta conference about 4 weeks ago. And since then, things have changed. And even when I was doing the presentation, there was a couple of folks in the room who had just attended a meeting the day before with the Alberta Federation of Agriculture, and things had changed, and someone had attended a meeting with the Canadian Seed Growers Association, and things had changed. So things are moving pretty quickly. So where I will start with the updates is with value creation consultations. How many people in the room attended a value creation consultation? Okay, so you've got one person. It looks like. So what was going on with that back in started in 2018, Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, they were starting to explore different models of how we could fund breeding programs. When I attended the consultations, what they were talking about was they were saying in order for Canada to remain competitive and to be able to produce high yield, high quality yield, we needed to invest more in our breeding programs. They felt like more could be going on. So they are proposing two different models for how we could do that. One of them was with EPR, so endpoint royalty. And the way that that model works is that a farmer would buy seed the way that they normally do. But then when they go to the elevator to sell their grain, they would have to pay a royalty at that point. And then the other option was the trailing contract. And with the trailing contract, the way that would work is that a farmer would go and buy their seed, but if they chose to replant that seed, they would have to pay back to where they bought that seed. So overall, at those consultations, the general tone was one of disapproval. People were not happy with either proposal. Mostly the unhappiness from the farmers was coming from, it wasn't really clear the way that these models would play out. Like there wasn't a lot of transparency or understanding of who would administer it, where would the funding go, what would happen with that? And also kind of in the long term, what are the long-term consequences? And also at the time, an economic assessment hadn't been done yet. So there's a lot of questions. Many of the commodity groups were saying that we needed more details. The numbers that I have up on there about the disapproval rating, that came from a survey that was done by the Alberta Federation of Agriculture and also from the group in Saskatchewan and also CAP here. They had a survey that was going over the summer, and they asked farmers how they felt about it. So generally, people were not very happy with what was going on with either of these two models. And so in terms of where we are with that, what happened was that they were doing these consultations, and then the election happened, so everything was put on hold. And since then, not too much has happened. So what we're expecting is that there's supposed to be some online consultations that are going to be open to the general public. That's coming up. And also they're going to be summarizing their consultation report. And I believe there's going to be an economic assessment. But pretty much it's like a little bit unclear. At this moment, it's a little bit unclear where that's going to go. It's kind of on hold. In the meantime, another thing that's happened is a conversation around a merger of the different seed groups that operate in Canada. How many people have heard of this one? Like how many people are aware of the Seed Synergy merger? Okay, we've got a few people in the room. So what was going on with this was that the different seed groups that operate within Canada, they all have kind of like different rules, different parts of the value chain with seed that they're involved with. They were proposing that these groups merge together. So it's the Canadian Seed Growers Association, Canadian Seed Trade Association, Canadian Seed Institute. Maybe it takes a long time to read all of them. There's a lot of groups and they have very long names. But the goal was to merge them together because they are saying that some of the work that they do kind of overlaps, so they wanted to streamline. And CropLife Canada was part of the conversations when this group was coming together and they were putting together some proposal. They had put together a green paper, a white paper. CropLife was part of that conversation, but now they've taken a step back. And probably their role moving ahead will be one of more being like advisory, but they're not part of the actual merger that they're proposing. And so what's happening with that is that these different groups are going to be voting on this merger coming up now in 2020. And their idea is to have one big lobby organization, and they're advocating, and I should say, if you're interested in learning more about it, if you just type in Seed Synergy into Google, you'll find the things that they're advocating for, they're proposing, but they want to see more certified seed. They're interested in that trailing contract option that I had mentioned earlier. They also like to see what they're calling a single window. So they like to see a lot of these different aspects that are related to regulation happen in one place. So they want to see variety registration happen in this one place, plant breeders' rights, plants with novel traits, and also certifying pedigreed seed. And they'd also like to see that plant with novel traits. They like to see that process of getting those registered, they'd like to see that happen faster. They feel like right now it's not happening fast enough and it's hindering farmers' ability to be able to use that technology. So so we'll see what's gonna happen with that as the members vote for it. It's not moving that smoothly either. Within the organizations, there's some people who wanna see it happen, there's some people who don't. Each member organization is slightly different in their structure. I believe it's a Seed Growers Association that's the largest one. Like they have a really large member base, so trying to get everyone on board with that, it looks like it's they're kind of slowly working their way through it. So, yeah, people have been talking about it. I think it looks like it is going to happen, but yeah, we'll see what happens with that vote. And then also, just last week, I don't know how many people heard about this, about the Seed Variety Use Agreement pilot. How many people heard about that one? Okay, so we've got a couple of people who heard about that one. This was just announced last week. And so this is independent of the Ag Canada consultations. So I don't know if I've already confused everyone because I know that I've kind of talked about a few overlapping kind of themes here, but they're all kind of happening a little bit separate from each other, but definitely people are talking to each other, and yeah, there's some overlaps. But this is a new pilot program that's being introduced, and the idea is to start piloting the concept of a trailing contract. So what I mentioned earlier, the way that this is going to work is that farmers will be able to buy these seeds, and so far it applies to these specific varieties like CS Daybreak and CS Accelerate, and also there's a Roundup Ready soybean that this is going to apply to. And the way that it's going to work is that farmers will be able to buy this seed, and then if they choose to replant it, they're going to have to report back to the seed company, and then they'll have to pay to be able to replant. So we'll see. So yeah, that's just, I think that it's going to start this summer, and this is an initiative coming from the private company, from the private sector. And I don't know how many people have I confused? Oh, no one. Fantastic. Well, having kind of spent time kind of trying to sort this all out, I have to admit that sometimes I do get confused, and it's because there's a lot of different people who are involved in it. In some ways they're kind of separate, but there's definitely a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of people talking to each other. And this gives you a bit of a timeline of how things are moving. So it started back in 2017 with Seed Synergy, then we entered into the consultations. Just last week we had this new pilot program introduced, and we're gonna learn more as things develop. This might be a good time to stop for questions. No questions. That's great. And also I should, all of this is also being covered in farm papers. Like a lot of this information is out there. So if you are interested in kind of keeping up with it, a lot of information is there. Yeah, I live in Edmonton now, but I still get the Manitoba Cooperator, and like that's where I get a lot of my information to kind of keep up with this. So you can get that there. And so maybe a little bit, just to move on to some of this other parts that I wanted to cover is like, there's just some questions about how this could impact organic agriculture. In some ways, it's going to be very similar to what's going on. It's going to impact the same way for conventional producers as it will for organic, because it's going to change the way that the amount of money that people are paying for seed. And depending on which system goes ahead and what we do, it could impact us in a different way. So, for example, if we do have the EPR system, what does that mean in terms of the money that's collected? Could it possibly be collected for organic varieties? Is that an option? Or if that system goes ahead, would it actually make it harder for the organic sector to access, to be able to have a breeding program? Because at the moment right now, we don't really have a lot of varieties we have very few varieties that have been bred for organic systems. And within the organic sector, there is an interest in in breeding more for organic systems. And then with trailing royalties, I mean, when it comes to the seed variety use agreements, it's really up to the farmer to decide whether or not they want to buy those varieties. But again, it's kind of unclear how this is all, like, what does it mean 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? In general, the price of seed is going to go up because you're going to have to continue to pay as you're replanting. And I guess one difference too with organic farmers is that organic farmers, when they're choosing to save their seed, that means that they're able to work with organic seed, or if they buy common seed from an organic neighbor, this is one way that they're able to continue using organic seed. And would one of these systems kind of change farmers' access to that? Sorry, did you have a question? Okay, you can go ahead.
Ian Robson is my name. So I'm wondering, where's the push coming from for this seed synergy process? We know it's an unholy partnership between private companies and the federal government, and it's the federal government that's basically trying to withdraw very slowly, and they've done a withdrawal over 40 years from the fantastic work they've been doing in breeding and crop research. What can you comment?
So I guess the push is probably coming from a little bit of both. Like I think like the organizations within Seed Synergy would like to see this move ahead because some of the people would see a benefit of being able to do that. And then at the same time, the federal government, like in part of those, in the consultations, I think there's been a bit of like a mixed message of them saying that they want to continue doing breeding, but at the same time, they want to analyze ways that they can maybe pull out of that or change the way that they're doing it, or maybe only work with the breeding program for the first part of the breeding program and then pass the rest off to private. So I would say that maybe it hasn't been very, very clear from the government side, but what I've heard people talking about is that there is an interest to possibly pull out and then to have industry take over more.
Yeah, I think that's the concern. There's a whole pullback by the federal government in a whole number of areas, including variety registration process, which has been the foundation of our seed system. It registers varieties that are worth it for the market purposes and for varieties that we already have identified are really beneficial to us as farmers. And that a lot of that work was done on the public dollars, about 60% of the work, and it's currently about 30% by farmers, and there's private filling in the holes. But the thing is that the public must keep funding that. They have just as much interest in a good crop as we do as farmers. They don't want to have a crop failure, and they must keep up their end of the bargain. And we can't let the government keep pulling back as they have. They've reduced their work in forage crop. There's very little work done in flax, some of the other crops. And this is mostly talking about wheat. And as was mentioned, there was very few people attended that consultation process. that the government did in the fall of 2018. And they want to say that they've done a consultation process. I was there. It's a very poor consultation process. And as you saw today, there's not too many people that are well informed about it. But we got this part. They certainly want more money out of our pockets as farmers. And that's the critical factor. We're paying already for really good work, and there's quite a bit of money in the system. It's a matter of keeping up that public end of the bargain and not letting the government get off the hook. If private people want to do it, they can do it on their own dollar.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think maybe, I don't know if Laura's cutting me off. Laura is cutting me off. I just have a couple more slides and I could talk very quickly. I've been told that actually when I present, I do talk too quickly, so I can do it. But thank you for that information. And probably if you want more information about what you just mentioned, you can go to the NFU website and some of that information is there. And it also makes me realize that I wasn't very clear that those consultations were related mostly to cereals. I didn't mention that.
I should say that it's all seeds.
It's all
starting
seeds.
with
Yeah,
cereals, but it's all seeds.
Okay, so just quickly, that there have been some other, like there was those two models that were proposed, but people were talking about possible other options. So for example, there's still always an option of giving more money to universities or giving more, like as we just heard, to get the government to still do that and to get more funding for our public breeding program. There's also an option for the commodity groups to collect more checkoff and to then redirect that money into plant breeding. Something that's exciting that's possibly on the horizon with the EU is that they're looking more at organic seed and looking at what the needs are of organic farmers and allowing for different type of variety registration, which is a whole other can of worms, which I'd be happy to talk to you about another time, but I'll fly through that. And I also wanted to give a bit of like a plug for the participatory plant breeding program, because that's also an example of another form of breeding that we can see more of, and it has a lot of benefits to it in terms of having farmers participating, and also in terms of a model that's been shown to be a bit cheaper. So it could be a way that we can do breeding in the future that's applicable to organic farmers. And if you want more information about that, you can talk to me, or you can also talk to the University of Manitoba about that one, Martin Ence's group.